Hello and welcome everyone to our session today on Let's Code Together. My name is Dr. Samina Qureshi and I'm an International Medical Officer with the MSSO. So I, along with my MSSO colleague Nicole Fornerato, will be your instructors today. And in addition, my MSSO colleague Hannah Eaton will also be helping facilitate the session. So Nicole, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Fornerato, and I'm a clinical associate with the MSSO. I've been with the MSSO for about a year and a half now. Before that, I, like you, was in your shoes. I was in pharma and biotech in both clinical and safety. I am based in northern New Jersey in the New York City metropolitan area, coming to you today from a very chilly but sunny day. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Nicole. So let's get started. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. Now, in order to be interactive with you throughout the session and allow you to participate in various coding exercises and questions, we are going to be using the PolEV software. And the instructions, as Hannah mentioned a few minutes ago, to join are in the chat section of your GoToMeeting control panel. Now, throughout the presentation and at various points, I am going to prompt you to log into PolEV so that you can immediately participate in the coding exercises. Now, you don't need to feel shy or hesitant whatsoever when you answer these questions because all of the answers are anonymized. Now, another point to make is that the Q&A opportunities that we have are intended to address questions about the specific principles that we're discussing today around the coding examples. And it's not intended for general coding questions. Although if you do encounter often in your experience at work or overall on challenging scenarios or challenging coding issues, you may submit those towards the end of the presentation. You will have an opportunity and we'll take those examples or suggestions and incorporate them in upcoming Let's Code Together English webinars. So today, in addition to the PolEV software, we're also going to be using the web-based browser for exercises, and we have provided a training ID and password for your use today for your convenience in case you've forgotten your organization password and ID. So again, that's in the chat section of the control panel. In addition, we will, as I said, provide an opportunity towards the end of the session for a Q&A. The session itself today is scheduled for 90 minutes, and in the event that we don't cover all of the exercises that we've prepared today, we will carry those over to the next Let's Code Together session. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so as you know, we all come to industry, we all are in our positions with varied levels of experience and exposure to MEDRA. So at the outset, it's a good idea to just provide a very brief background on MEDRA. There are varied levels of experience, of course. It's a good idea to let you know what MEDRA stands for in case you're brand new and this is your very first lecture or session with us. MEDRA stands for the Medical Dictionary for Regulatory Activities. MEDRA was an ICH initiative and developed around the mid-1990s. The ICH, in case you don't know, stands for the International Council for Harmonization. Now, as we all know, MEDRA is a living, breathing, and ever-evolving terminology. So the ICH appointed the MSSO, or the MEDRA Maintenance and Support Services Organization, the task to maintain and further develop the terminology. Now, in addition to developing the terminology, we are also tasked with providing training, such as the one you're attending today, and to administer the MEDRA licenses. Now, all of our MSSO activities are overseen by the ICH's MEDRA Management Committee. Now, the MEDRA Management Committee in its turn in itself is composed of various industry and regulatory bodies, such as the FDA, and the WHO acts as an observer. So this, very briefly, is the background of how MEDRA came into existence and what the organizational structure is like. Okay, next slide. I think one before that. Okay, so we have to go to, as you know, we have to read our disclaimer and copyright notice before any of our sessions. This is a requirement. The veterans out there know that we must, although it's very verbose, we have to review it. Nevertheless, I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. So the first bullet basically talks about the fact that MEDRA is owned by the ICH, and all the material that I'll be presenting today is also copyrighted material and owned by the ICH. Now, aside from the logos that we have, all of the material presented today may be used by you internally in your organization. However, if you change or modify the material in any way, you have to acknowledge the changes and in no way imply that those changes are supported by the ICH. And the second bullet is legal lingo, so I'll just, it's hard to summarize that. I'll read it as such. The presentation is provided as is without warranty of any kind. In no event shall the ICH or the authors of the original presentation be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability arising from the use of the presentation. And thankfully, the third bullet for us is not relevant today because it talks about third-party material, and we don't have any third-party material in today's session. Okay. Okay, so as I said at the outset, we do encourage participants to participate when we prompt you for the various coding exercises, and you can do that, of course, as we mentioned in the control section of the chat panel for questions, but we will be using the poll EV in order for you to participate in the exercises. Now, if you have questions throughout the session and you don't hear them being addressed or we don't get a chance to respond to them, don't fret. We will get to your question and respond to you with an email reply. Also, in the interest of time, I'd like to at the outset make certain that we want to agree to disagree because everyone has a different perspective on how they approach various coding scenarios, how they look at various verbatim strings. So you may slightly differ on the coding choices with your colleagues or with our choices, but let's just agree to disagree. With an endeavor of this type, with a exercise of this nature, that's to be expected. Now, again, I said in the beginning, specific coding requests or questions on how to code X or Y or Z, those kind of requests cannot be taken. Certainly, we will answer questions around the principles that we're discussing at the moment. Okay. And again, save your examples or coding challenges that you want for us to address, and we will incorporate those into our subsequent upcoming Let's Code Together sessions. And we'll have that opportunity at the end of the session, towards the end of the session. Okay, now I've been talking about Poll EV several times, so let's show you how to actually log into it. This platform is very easy to use, either using your computer, internet browser, your phone, your tablet, whatever you want to use today. Use the URL right here on the slide, www.pollEV.com/NICOLEF. Just enter there, it'll take you to the Poll EV, and then you don't need to enter a username. Again, a reminder that these activities are anonymous, so don't hesitate at all to participate. And on the very next slide, in case you're using a smartphone, you can take advantage of the camera on your smartphone, show it this QR code, and it'll take you immediately without having to type in the whole URL. It'll take you immediately to the Poll EV platform. So let's all do that. Everyone, I'm going to give everyone a few seconds to either use the QR code or the URL that was on the previous slide. You can also go in the chat section and get the instructions there on how to log in. Everything for your reference throughout the session is available for you there to reference it. So let's all log in. I have a few questions I'm going to ask you and ask you to participate just to see that it's working. Okay, so let's all log in. And what you should see is, let's see, we'll go to the first Poll EV question. This is what you should see. Okay, great. So people have logged in and people have responded on the question, where are you located? So Nicole, your geography may be a little better than mine, but I see lots of people in North America, Europe, wow, in Africa, in India, in Australia. So we have truly a very global presence, and someone is waiting in the waters trying to make it to shore and then they're changing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have to say, Samina, I say it all the time. Anyone who's taken any of my webinars, this is my favorite poll of the day. I love to see where people are located and have a very international audience. This is great. Wow, we have representation pretty much from everywhere, I think, except
Yeah, I
Antarctica
think,
right now. We
yeah,
need some Antarctica people.
all continents are represented. We see some
This is
people from
great.
South America as well.
I love it. So
Excellent.
it does
Excellent.
look like somebody's out in Hawaii. Too bad that's not us, Samina. Maybe
I know
next
maybe next
webinar.
session will be in Hawaii. We'll join that user.
We'll drop our pin in Hawaii.
Absolutely. So I'm very happy to see and encourage that there is successful logging into the Poll EV platform, as well as people are responding. They're not shy, they're participating. And so we expect and we encourage similar participation in the coding exercises. Okay, so wonderful. Thank you very much. So let's move on to another poll question. The next one, and see how people respond to that. So here it's basically you have to type in what role do you perform. So I always like to get a good idea, as well as Nicole. We want to see who our audience is, what their functions are in their various organizations. It kind of helps us sort of tweak the exercises a bit. So here we have people dealing with coding, dealing with their PV associates, their encoders. Okay, so that's good. That's actually the type of audience or the type of roles that this is particularly geared towards. Medical coding specialists, trial managers, PV specialists. Very good. So a wide variety.
We have a couple of QPPVs.
Mm-hmm. Data managers, medical reviewers, very good. So it's good to see that all roles, even whether you touch coding, very hands-on specifically, or even if you're in a role that sees coded data, it's very important to learn how coding is performed and what the various challenges are, what the various approaches are. Excellent. So good. We're getting lots of responses, so people are interactive, very encouraging for Nicole and myself to see that. Metadata analyst. Very good.
About the drug safety, we have a good mix. Safety clinical. This is great. It looks like everything's working, so we could probably,
Let's move on.
Yeah. Another QPPV. Great. This is awesome.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide and kind of get started. Okay, so again, another tool, and just to let you know before we start, for today's session, you have, in order to perform the coding exercises, you have 3 choices of browsers to use. You can use the Medra desk-based browser, if that's what you typically use. You can use the web-based browser, which I like, and which I will be actually demonstrating for you today in our examples on how to arrive at various answers, as well as you can use the mobile browser. And again, we have the temporary training ID and password for your reference to use in case you don't want to use your organizations or it's not handy for you. Again, you can find that in the chat section of the control panel. Okay, so or another way to access the web-based browser in case you want to do what I'm going to do today and use the web-based browser. Nicole, if you can bring up, we can access the web-based browser from our medra.org website or any of these URLs that we have shown you on the slide. So if you go to our medra.org website, as Nicole has done, at the very top, you see the acronym WBB. That is for the web-based browser. You click it and it will automatically take you there. So that's what I'm going to be using today. Okay, so just various ways, various options to arrive at the web-based browser. Okay, so again, if you want to use the URL, it was on the previous slide, you can do that as well as over here. And here we've put this on a slide, that information which is available to you in the chat section of the control panel of our temporary username and password for the web-based browser if you want to follow along today. Okay, so we'll leave this up for a few minutes, get logged into that and get ready for doing exercises. Keep this handy for yourself, and then I will prompt you to go ahead and approach the exercises when we come to them. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, again, a few things before we really dig deep and start an actual exercise. I want to address some of the challenges that we will face or that you typically may face when you approach coding questions. Sometimes the term you're looking for that's in your verbatim string or in your coding scenario, there's not always an exact match available, right? And as I said in the beginning, there's always more than one approach and maybe slightly different answers from what you think and from what I think. Now, one thing that you can reference on how to approach various challenges and various coding principles is the points to consider term selection document. This is a great reference. It provides options on coding. It presents to you preferred options as well as alternate options to adopt. And of course, this depends on your own preference as well as the type of data that you see in your organization. So you may choose the preferred approach that the PTC recommends or adopt several of the alternate approaches that the PTC offers. Now again, the way you interpret data is extremely important, and we're going to show you that with a little picture in the next slide. And of course, assumptions should be avoided. When you're coding, only take the information that is given to you. Don't assume things and add information that's not there. Conversely, don't neglect to report information that is given to you. So that's the best approach. Make the best approximation with the information that's given to you and use your medical judgment on what that term should be. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide. Okay, so here's an example. When I said interpretation of data is extremely important, the way I interpret something, and just look at this picture here. For me, when I look at this picture, I see a black dog in the snow running towards me. What do you see, Nicole?
Well, actually, I saw the same thing, but I also do see, if you look at it, you could see a man running through the woods, so with a sweater on. That's
Oh,
what
yeah.
I mean.
Well, actually, you're right. Oh, my goodness. That's right. If you really squint a little, that's what you see, a guy with his back towards us wearing a black coat going into the forest. So good point. Good alternate thing that you saw, Nicole. So yeah, so just like I said, there are different perspectives, different interpretation. You can see totally two different things. So hopefully our coding examples aren't that far and varied with what we interpret them to be, but let's see what happens when we do our coding exercises and the various answers that we may arrive at. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, again, a little bit more emphasis on medical judgment. Anytime we approach a verbatim or coding scenario, you have to take a very nuanced approach. It has to be a fine balance between your existing coding conventions, your in-house organizational coding rules conventions, as well as making sure you all as employees of that organization are consistently coding those principles. And of course, use your medical judgment to make sure you accurately and adequately capture whatever is being reported. So, it's important in order to manage risk to the patients that you accurately capture what's being reported. Now, again, since we are not all experts in all of the therapeutic areas that are out there and the things that we may see or encounter in our coding verbatims or coding scenarios, and as well, science is ever-evolving subject, it's very important to make use of medical references if you're not too certain or not too familiar with a particular scientific subject or the concept at hand. So make use of medical references. I do so in my everyday job function as well. As well, sometimes you search hard and you search everywhere, but the term or the concept that you're looking for is not actually in MedDRA. You search very hard. It's not adequately represented with the existing terms in MedDRA. So what you can do in that instance is you can submit a change request using our WebCR tool. So it's very likely that maybe you are correct and that concept does not exist. So you can request us to include that. Of course, there are more chances that your term will be accepted if you provide a very clear justification as well as perhaps a reference as to what that particular concept is. Now, the methodology or the proper appropriate way to submit a change request in our WebCR tool, there's a session and there's materials on our website that you can find detailing on how to do that correctly and precisely. So I would take advantage of that in case you are submitting a change request to reference those materials on our website. Okay, so let's go on. So just wanted to flash that QR code for you, for those of you who are tech savvy and in using your smartphone cell camera. Every time I want to, ask you to participate, just flash that QR code and you'll be there. Okay, so let's get started, everyone. We're ready to focus and going to start on our first example, coding example for the day. So here in the blue box at the top, you see the example verbatim string. Let's say you encounter this at your job function, worsening CHF. And of course, they've spelled out in parentheses what they mean by CHF, congestive heart failure. So if I were to encounter this particular verbatim string, how would I approach it? As with any coding scenario or before you perform coding, there are several things or decision tree that you have in your mind or questions you ask yourself. Is this clear enough for me to code? And I think this is because, I have no doubt what CHF stands for. It's in the parentheses clarified for me. Then you think to yourself, what actually is being reported? What actually is occurring? That way, in my mind, I sort of think of where in the browser I'm going to look for this specific term, which SOC I'm going to look for in the hierarchy that this term may be residing under. And of course, what is the anatomical site? For worsening congestive heart failure, obviously it's some sort of cardiac disorder. It'll be somewhere in the cardiac SOC. So I have some rough idea where I'm going to start looking. And then of course, as I drill down in the browser and I look for my term, if I don't know it off the bat, I'm going to look for the most granular term to represent this particular scenario. And then of course, sometimes you have very complex verbatims in which you may need to split the term. And again, based on your internal challenges, whether you are able to split or not, you approach it as such. And you of course follow your internal coding guidelines. Okay, so now everyone put your thinking caps on. This is the scenario, worsening congestive heart failure. Okay, now what I'll do is go into the browser. Thank you, Nicole. We'll log in. And then I want to see, remember I said worsening congestive heart failure. So I said, well, let me look somewhere. It's somewhere in the cardiac, right? It's a heart type disorder, and there's a SOC dedicated to that. So I'm going to open that up. And then I'm doing a top-down search. So I'm going from a very broad hierarchy level SOC, and then I'm going to drill down further and further. So then I'm going to see, let's see, which HLGT might be most familiar or pertain to what I was seeing in my verbatim string. Congestive heart failure. So there's an HLGT dedicated to heart failures. Perhaps it's that one. Okay. So when I further drill down under HLGTs, we see various HLTs, which is the next level down in the MEDRA hierarchy. Here I'm going to look for, let's see, it's not really a sign and symptom. They said it's a worsening congestive heart failure. They didn't say it's a left or right. So let me just look in the broad HLT of heart failures NEC. And there I see these various PTs. Now, before I guide you any further, I'm just going to leave it at that. I've sort of guided you of where I'm going to generally look. I see all these terms. And now I'm going to go back to my slides, and I'm going to actually ask you, what do you think is the best LLT in order to approach this particular exercise? So I've shown you in the web-based browser how I would approach it from a top down. I want you to log in on your own browsers, whichever browser you're using, and try and find that particular term. Okay, so we'll give everyone a few seconds. And then I'm going to bring up another point or another reference that the MEDRA browser houses that can be quite useful for you in approaching this particular exercise. Oh, goodness. Yeah, sorry, I think my mouse is too happy. Okay, so if I'm going to go ahead and start the discussion, I want you to go ahead and keep in your mind what you think you would choose. Let's go to the next slide and open the poll, Ev. All right, so let's see what people would pick for that particular scenario. worsened or worsening congestive heart failure? Okay, so the majority of you are choosing congestive cardiac failure aggravated, about 74% or so. Some of you are choosing condition worsened, 4%. 14% are choosing cardiac failure congestive. Okay, so what really kind of threw me off, or may have thrown some of you off, is which specific LLT is the best match with the reported verbatim. So let me go back one slide. Okay, now I don't know, there were several LLTs which were available for me. One was aggravated, one was condition aggravated, but I want to refer to my MEDRA concept descriptions in order to see how aggravation is dealt with. What is aggravated synonymous with? Okay, so as I look at my MEDRA concept descriptions, let me go to the web-based browser and open it from there. Let's open up the browser and I will show you how to reach the MEDRA concept descriptions. Okay, so this is the way I would approach this. I would look at the various PTs, cardiac failure congestive, that's exactly what's been reported, but mine said worsened congestive heart failure, right? With all the LLT choices over here, there's an aggravated, there's an congestive heart failure with acute exacerbation, there's rheumatic heart failure. With all these various LLTs, I'm kind of stuck and pondering whether there's no worsened, but there is something called congestive cardiac failure aggravated. Now, I'm not too sure if worsened and aggravated are the same thing as far as MEDRA is concerned. So what I can do on this, as well as multiple other concepts within MEDRA, there's a reference over here you can access from the browser at the top, MEDRA concept description. So I'm going to open that up. And I'm curious, what does aggravated mean as far as MEDRA is concerned as a concept? I drill down and I see I'm going to reach aggravated. Okay, for the purposes of MEDRA, aggravated means to make worse. For example, they give is bronchitis aggravated by smoking. So for the purposes of term placement in MEDRA, the use of modifiers exacerbated, aggravated, and worsened is interchangeable. Bingo. That exactly addresses my question that I had in mind of which LLT to use. Okay, again, before we go back to the exercise, I do want to reiterate that the MEDRA concept descriptions are not definitions per se, but they're actually just descriptions of how the concept is interpreted, used, and classified within the scope of MEDRA terminology. So again, it's not a definition, it's just the way that concept is addressed for the purposes of MEDRA. Okay, so a very easy and good reference to use. So with that knowledge in mind, the fact that aggravated and worsened are interchangeable, the best choice, I think, would be congestive cardiac failure aggravated. So let's go to the slides. The majority of you did choose that when we looked at the poll EV question. So the majority of you are right. And for the rest of you who didn't choose that, now you know why this is the correct answer. Okay, so 81%. So the majority of you were correct. So let me go to the next slide. And here, of course, as I mentioned, the correct answer for this particular exercise is LLT, congestive cardiac failure aggravated, because worsening, as we found out and confirmed with our MEDRA concept descriptions, is the same thing. Okay, so now for those of you who are thinking this is very easy, just as our audience is varied in experience, don't fret, we are going to come up with a bit more challenging questions as we move along today. Okay. So here's our example number 2. One of the things we got back, from our previous Let's Code Together sessions, the feedback included the fact that people wanted to see more and more medication error type of exercises, because I guess that's an area where people struggle with or find quite challenging. So our example number 2 is not quite so simple or easy as example number 1. Let's read it out. In the blue box, we have our scenario. The nurse accidentally gave an overdose of both the patient's blood thinner and his antihypertensive medication. The patient felt faint and vomited. So there's a bit more things going on in this one compared to the last one. So the nurse, who's a healthcare provider, or I'm sorry, a healthcare worker, accidentally gave an overdose. So very important to read how that's written. an overdose of both the blood thinner and the antihypertensive medication. Subsequently, the patient felt faint and vomited. So I'm thinking the typical questions that go through my mental decision tree: is this verbatim clear enough to code? What exactly happened? What is being reported? What site or what concept areas would I be looking at? And then, of course, I have to look at all the things that I need to capture, and then for each of those things that's reported, what is the most appropriate LLT? Okay. So before we begin further, I want to provide a brief sort of background on how we define medication errors. A medication error is any preventable. Remember, it's important to stress on the fact that it's any preventable event that can cause or lead to an inappropriate medication use or patient harm while the medication is in the control of a healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. So each of these three people can initiate the particular event, and it's something that's preventable. So in a general sense, this is how we define medication errors. Something that's preventable, and each of these three roles may initiate the particular event. Now, again, these events can revolve around either professional practice, around the use of healthcare products, or some type of procedure went awry. It can be in any phase, such as prescribing, product labeling, packaging, compounding, dispensing. There may be some dispensing errors that happen. It may be some type of administration error, education, or even monitoring and use. So it covers a wide variety of scenarios and areas where a medication error may occur. Okay, so what I would like to do now is sort of give you a very good chart. This is also available in our more detailed sessions that are solely and wholly dedicated to medication errors. We have seminars which are given in two parts. One is the Medication Error General Principles Part 1 webinar, as well as a week later we always provide the corresponding medication errors workshop. So those are something, if you're interested in medication errors, to listen to and participate in. They're dedicated solely to these types of issues that I just mentioned. Now, in order to approach our exercise today, I'm going to give you a little decision tree chart on how to organize your thoughts and sort of arrive at the correct code for each of the things that happened in this particular exercise. So here's like a little mental decision tree. There are three aspects to look at when you are given some type of medication error type scenario. Is the event that's happening intentional, or was it accidental? Right? So intentionality should be looked at. Again, you should see by whom. Who initiated the particular event? Was it a healthcare provider? Was it the consumer or the patient himself? And then, of course, you have to see the therapeutic intent, right? Was the person taking the product for some sort of therapeutic benefit or not? And this will become more clear as we do it. Here, if the intentionality is there, the healthcare, and here you have the little healthcare worker sign. This particular event, if it was initiated by a healthcare provider, like a nurse, pharmacist, doctor, and the therapeutic intent was there, then it's some type of off-label use, right? On the other hand, if the intentionality is there, but the event or the action was initiated or done or performed by the consumer or patient, and the therapeutic intent was there, it's some type of intentional product misuse type of term. However, if the therapeutic intent was not there, meaning let's say the patient intentionally took his sleeping pills not to help him sleep, but instead because he liked the associated high he got with them. So that's not therapeutic intent, right, for what the medication was to be used for. In that case, it becomes some type of abuse or dependence type of term. Now, in case you don't know, the report or the verbatim string or the coding scenario does not really show if the therapeutic intent was there or not, you don't know either way, then that becomes some sort of intentional product use issue. When you don't know the therapeutic intent, it's some type of issue. So this is a very nice sort of decision mental tree for you to figure out what type of term to look for based on the information provided. Now, if something happens accidentally, as in our scenario today, if something happens accidentally, regardless of whether it happened by a healthcare provider or a patient consumer, and the therapeutic intent is there, then it's some type of medication error. Okay? An error happened because it was accidental, regardless of who the event was initiated by or who it was performed by. Now, the third column is when you have very little information, you don't know the intentionality, you don't know even if it was accidental. If you don't know that, and regardless of who the event is initiated by, healthcare worker or patient, but the therapeutic intent is there, it was done in order for some benefit, then it's a product use issue. So you see the similarities when you don't know the intent. In this case, for intentionality, it's an intentional product use issue. Here, you don't know whether it's intentional or accidental, but the therapeutic intent is there, then it's a product use issue type of term. Okay, so for our purposes today, our scenario said the nurse did it accidentally. So let's go to our example. Okay, before we go there, another point I'd like to make in case you're interested to learn further on how to approach medication errors, the MEDRA term selection points to consider document as well as the points to consider companion document were both updated and supplemented in order to allow you, the MEDRA users, more guidance on this specific topic of medication errors. And as well, MEDRA was expanded with new terms and the hierarchy was a bit restructured in order to help support data retrieval and analysis for medication errors and product use issues. Okay, so as well, both of these term selection points to consider documents address both clinical as well as post-marketing scenarios in which particular medication errors may occur. So very good documents to reference and read up on if you're interested in medication errors. Okay, so let's go to our browser and try and sort of approach the particular example that we had. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, for the most part, the medication error type of terms are found in my SOC injury. So I'm going to go down, let's see, find my injury SOC. Again, I'm doing a top-down search. Let's open up this SOC. And then I'm going to go to my HLGT, which is relevant to our coding question today, medication errors and other product use errors and issues. So lots of stuff is in this HLGT, which may be of relevance to us today for this scenario. After I open that, I look at all the various HLTs under that HLGT. So I'm thinking, where could it be that nurse accidentally administered, right, an overdose to the patient? There were two types of medications that she gave him. But it was an accident and it was some sort of administration. So I think I'm going to look at this HLT, product administration errors and issues. I may be wrong, but it's no harm in looking at all the different PTs that are housed under this HLT. Okay, so I see, so basically what happened when I look at the gist of my coding exercise, what actually happened was there was an accidental overdose. But maybe there's some other PT in here. So I'm going to leave it at that just by guiding you at the proper HLT and let you decide which is the most appropriate LLT or LLTs, because quite a bit happened in that particular scenario. So let's go back to the browser and then the next slide. Okay, so here's the poll. Having that particular question, and I'll read it out again to you. The nurse accidentally gave an overdose of both the patient's blood thinner and his antihypertensive medication. The patient felt faint and vomited. Please pick all the LLTs and the best LLTs that you think that address all of the things that happen in that coding scenario. Okay, so I see a lot of people are very good. They're choosing something to address the accidental overdose. People are also capturing correctly the events that actually happened as a result of that. Subsequent to that, the patient felt faint and vomited, so excellent. Okay. Okay, a few more seconds to for people to see what they would choose. Okay, I'm happy to see that people are getting the most specific, most granular LLT that addresses the multiple drug overdose accidental. So kudos to you for those of you who picked that. Okay, so second or more, and then we're going to go to the next slide. Okay, so somewhat stabilized. Okay, so here are the final answers, and then I'll let you know why I arrived at those. So for some of you picked accidental overdose, you were not incorrect because that is the PT under which the most specific LLT to address our scenario is multiple drug overdose accidental. So if you picked accidental overdose, you are right, but even more correct is the specific LLT because the nurse accidentally gave overdoses of two types of medication, right? So this is the most specific, most accurate LLT. And of course, we can't neglect, remember I said don't omit information that is given to you, to the two adverse events that the patient encountered, feeling faint and vomited. So these three LLTs are the correct choices for this particular exercise. So good, I was very encouraged to see that a lot of you chose the correct LLTs. Okay, do we have any questions at this point, Hannah?
We have had two people submit accidental overdose therapeutic agent as their suggestion.
Okay, so let's see. Let's go back to the browser. Therapeutic agent. Okay, so I'm sorry, what did they pick?
They picked accidental overdose parentheses therapeutic agent.
Okay, so like I said, the choice PT accidental overdose is correct. It's not wrong because there are several LFTs underneath it, but the most appropriate and the most closest match is multiple drug overdose accidental. You're not incorrect in saying therapeutic agent, but it's even more correct because you also captured the fact that there were multiple drugs. So it's not an incorrect answer. The best choice would be the multiple drug overdose accidental. But they're not wrong because at MedDRA concept level, they're all housed under or linked to the correct PT of accidental overdose. Okay, very good. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. And what was the other question? Was it around this particular exercise?
It was just two people, both who submitted that term.
Okay. Okay, good. Very good. All right, so let's move on to the next slide, which is our third example. Okay, here we're reading out an acronym. The patient's GJ tube was obstructed after administration of feed. Now I'm thinking, is this verbatim clear enough to code? I think that if tube was not in there, I might scratch my head and be sort of confused on what exactly do they mean by GJ. But since GJ tube is there, I have a bit more context as well as the rest of the scenario. The GJ tube was obstructed after administration of feed, okay? Again, my mental thinking decision tree is thinking, is this clear enough to code? I think so. I have enough context. Plus, I can use my medical references to clarify and confirm what I'm thinking of what GJ tube is. What is the anatomical site? I would say something having to do with a particular apparatus or a device, a GJ tube. And then, of course, once I'm correctly in the right area of MedDRA, in the right SOC, then I have to drill down to the most appropriate granular LLT term that would address this particular concept that's being described. Okay, so just in order to confirm what GJ tube is, what I did is I opened up a reference, and you can use any reference, a standardized reference. Maybe your organization recommends a few that they want everyone to use, or you can just do a Google search and find a very good, reputable medical reference in order to confirm any thoughts you have or any questions you may have about a particular therapeutic area or concept. So here I want to see, I did my homework, I researched, and I found a reference that actually tells me what a GJ tube is. It confirms that it stands for a gastrostomy jejunostomy tube. Okay, and again, this does have to do with feeds, and so the context that I got was correct. Okay, so this particular reference confirms for me what that acronym stands for, so I'm a bit more confident on what I thought on what this stands for. Then I use another reference and I say, well, when they said that it got, I'm sorry, it said it was obstructed. Do these things actually become obstructed? So just as my own background knowledge, and in order to make sure I'm going in the right direction, I looked up GJ tubes and them getting obstructed. And lo and behold, that is actually a very common thing that happens. And then I'll just, instead of reading the whole article, I'll just let you know that my suspicion was correct, that GJ tubes do get obstructed, and this article deals about that. So I can rest assured and feel confident that this is a common thing that happens with this particular device. So again, I used my medical references to confirm my initial thoughts about where this particular concept may be, this particular term may be in the Medro browser. Okay, so I go through my next slide, and then I open up my browser. And then I look again. What I'm going to do is, my suspicion was that it's some type of something having to do with this particular device, right? A GJ tube. It's like a tongue twister. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in my SOC of product issues, right? I think my device terms are possibly in that SOC. So here, this is a relatively new SOC that was added in version 19. So I'm not too familiar with it because it's a relatively the newest SOC that was added. I see that what I'm looking for, like I said, that tube is some type of device. So let me look under that HLGT of device issues. When I look in that HLGT, then I say, well, what happened? There's computer issues. I don't think it was a computer issue that happened. I think it wasn't an operational issue. I think it got obstructed, right? It's some type of malfunction event. So there's two HLTs I may possibly look at: device issues, NEC, which stands for not elsewhere classified, and device malfunction events, NEC. So let me open up this one. So I'm going to stop right here and let you do the browsing and the searching and the pondering and figure out what is the best LLT. So I want everyone to use their whatever browser they're using today, the desktop browser, the web-based browser like I'm using, or their mobile browser, and look for the most appropriate LLTs to address this coding scenario that we have. Again, it was the patient's GJ tube was obstructed after administration of feed. So that gave me a little more context. My references confirmed my suspicion, and so I would like now to go to the poll question and see what you think is the best LLT for that particular scenario. Okay, so I think in just this brief period of the Let's Code Together session, I have made everyone experts. Now they know how to search, and everyone has chosen, 100% of you have chosen actually the correct term. There is an LLT that's very specific for the topic that's being described or the event that's being described in our example. So all of you answered correctly. The correct choice is LLT, gastrostomy jejunostomy tube obstruction. Excellent. So let's go to the next slide. And yes, here's the answer. Everyone got that. And I think, Nicole, we have made everyone experts on coding. You know, nothing more to do now.
That's right. So except go to another example, right?
Right. So we'll see how you address Nicole's examples.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to these examples. Rather than browsing and searching the browser, I'm going to kind of give open-ended polls for everyone to chime in. I want to hear everybody's opinions on this terms. So with that being said, we received this term, trouble speaking, from a participant a couple of months ago. And I'm finally getting around to now having it in the session. And it was when I saw it, I said, oh, trouble speaking, what came to mind? So there were a couple of ways I could have approached this term. So I decided the way I'm going to approach it in today's class is I want to walk you through my process of how I would have handled it by going through all the items that kind of went through my mind as I saw this term with no further context available. Now, remember, when coding, we can't use any other context than what's in the reported or verbatim term. So we have this term, trouble speaking. Now you say, it might be simple, right? Speech disorder, it could be, but let's see, there could be many other options I'm gonna walk you through today. So is it clear enough to code? What's being reported? And then, you know, you always have to think about what's the most appropriate LLT for this term. So with that being said, I wanna go right to a poll and I wanna see what everyone thinks. I wanna hear from all of you. So when you hear the term trouble speaking, what do you relate it to? Do you think it's a pre-existing, could it be a piece of a pre-existing condition? Now, I'm just saying in your mind, what do you relate it to? Because obviously we know we can't take the term out of context, but just what different ways can you take trouble speaking? A speech disorder? Oh, I put speech disorder twice, sorry. And people are thinking about, oh, that's my fault. So there was probably another choice on there. But slurred speech, it could even be, right, if you have trouble speaking, sometimes you could get a dental procedure and then it could be a complication where, you know, you come out, you're numbed, and then you have a little trouble speaking. So I just want to see, or none of the above. Do people have a different idea of what they think it is? So it looks like between the two choices that were the same, speech disorder, that's the winner currently. So let's see as we move forward. So with that, I wanted to give people a chance to actually give their opinion on what do you think trouble speaking can be, especially those that picked none of the above from the previous slide. I want to see what do you think? Just give general, you can write whatever you want. Don't worry, we don't know who you are. Put any feedback in here you have. A shock response, okay, let's just see what different people come up with. So it depends on the disease group, very good. Aphasia, very good. Neurological, it can be. So the poll was just to like spark some ideas to see how different people would approach this. More information needed, could be a CVA, it could be aphasia, it could be dysarthria, speech disorder, psychological, well, that's true, could be. Could even be anxiety, right? Sometimes people have anxiety attack and they can't speak. I think trouble speaking can be due to any psychological problem. Query, okay, keep it going. Loss of voice, hoarseness. So Samina, when you see this term, are you thinking some of the things that the people are putting in here as well? Too shy?
Absolutely.
Oh, I didn't even think of that one, too shy.
Absolutely.
But,
yeah, I would think it's some type of speech disorder, but with all the other input that people have, it does make me say, well, no, it could be that. So all of these are possibilities with what's given.
Yeah. Right, lots of different nervous system. I'm going to give a couple more seconds here because I really want to see, make sure everyone has a chance to provide their feedback. We have a bunch of people online today. So stroke, okay, yeah. Dysarthria, not possible to clarify, stay general, okay, need more information. Can refer to anything, expressive aphasia, speech disorder, so query, speech impairment. Wow, we're getting lots and lots of articulation problem, trouble speaking due to other complications. This is so true, right? I mean, as we saw in the first poll, and now we're seeing with everyone on the line, oh, even a drug allergy. I didn't think of that one either. So all these different things. Not knowing the language, oh, there's another one.
That's a new perspective.
That is definitely a new perspective. And see, because we have such a great international audience, that one came up, which is great. Throat tumor, too general, lots of different things. Okay, I'm going to give another couple seconds, make sure. Intoxicate. Oh, yeah, there's a good one too. Didn't think of that either. Could be a drug intoxication, an alcohol intoxication, and you might not be able to speak right. Expressive language disorder. All right, it looks like the poll's slowing down, but as you could see from what I presented and then what all of you suggested, there are many different ways that this can be handled. So I'll walk you through kind of what I thought of when I saw this term, and we'll see where we go from there. So the first thing I thought of was, like many of you, can trouble speaking be aphasia? So the key points of this are impairment of language, Okay, so you say to yourself, that might work, right? You're having trouble speaking. It could be an impairment of language. Communication can be impossible when you have this. But the thing to keep in mind is it's always due to injury to the brain, most commonly from a stroke, particularly in older individuals. It can also arise from head trauma, brain tumors, or infections. So we have no idea if this is true without additional patient information, as the only information we have is trouble speaking. So this is a classic example of not being able to, not kind of inferring information as we go, right? So I should have also mentioned, as Samina mentioned, what I did was I first thought of the words that came to my mind, the medical concepts, I should say, that came to my mind when I saw trouble speaking, and then I used a reference to kind of define and look a little bit further into each concept. So that was the first thing that came to my mind. So I kind of did a reference check on it, and we got the additional information on it. And we'll say, okay, wait, now we don't want to infer anything, so I'm not too sure this is a great match, right? So then we moved on to difficulty speaking, which is what, or dysarthria. So, which is what also a couple people have mentioned in the open-ended poll. And as you can see or already may know, a patient with this may present slurred speech, hoarse voice, problems speaking in a regular rhythm. They could have loud or quiet speech. Again, though, as in the previous example, you can see it's caused by brain damage or brain changes, at least from this reference, right? So right up here, you can see we have it, difficulty speaking, and it specifically states it's caused by brain damage or brain changes later in life. So now that we have this, we have no idea, again, if this type of an injury or brain damage occurred in our patient, right? Again, we just have the information, trouble speaking, and say, okay, well, now this one may be ruled out too, or we may want to look into it a little further. Not quite sure here what we're going to do yet. So let's keep searching. Let's keep referencing what we're thinking about. So in my thought process, the next thing I came to in my mind was an articulation disorder, which again, I'm glad to see some people were on the same page as me, right? Like they also thought maybe this can be an articulation disorder. So at first it may seem like a great option, but once you dig a little deeper, you can see that articulation disorder relates more to the inability to produce speech sounds and not so much the inability to speak or having trouble speaking. So with that being said, once I reference that, check the definition, I'm thinking, okay, well, the term doesn't really state that there's an inability to produce speech sounds. It just says that they're having trouble speaking, right? So in the end, I would say the learning points for this term would be to always think about what could be causing the trouble speaking. It could be something, we got many, many, many great answers in that poll we did, right? From a language problem to too shy. It could also be maybe the person has a swollen tongue for some reason and they're having trouble speaking. Like I said, a dental procedure, a brain injury, an accident, articulation problem. There could be slurring of speech for some reason. It could be from a pre-existing disease or condition like Parkinson's, right? We're not really quite sure what is going on. So in this case, I think what my next thought was in my process was my final suggestion would be to query the term for clarification. So as you can see from the previous slides, there could be many different ways to end the poll results, which is very important because that shows, people working with coding, dealing with coding, they interpret it, everybody interpreted it a different way. And always a good rule of thumb is when there's more than one interpretation of a term, it's always best to query for clarification, right? And I would say that if clarification is not received, I would suggest to document the approach chosen and choose a generic LLT, something like unevaluable event, or something to that related to that, because it's best to have a generic term chosen if no clarification is received. And I would say a good learning points for this are research all choices available to you, use your browser search functionality to ensure you covered every aspect of the term being reported. Use internal conventions. Like I mentioned, if there is no, if you do have a term like this and you can't get clarification, and you need to come up with a way to handle a term for the future in case this comes up again and again, I would say make sure you document it, use your internal coding conventions, and ensure a consistent approach. Now, what I'm going to do is actually see if this will work. I want to go back to the poll and see if anybody could type in. I want to see, now that we went through the references and kind of my thought process, and we saw all the great options that people provided in this poll, would people kind of handle this a different way? Would you then now say a query is definitely in order, or would you code to one of these types of disorders or things that are happening? So I'm not sure if everyone can get back in here. So we're going to see if we can get any additional responses. Okay, we're getting some more. So I wanted to give people another chance. So it looks like now we're getting a lot of people saying query. So walking through the process was actually maybe, hopefully, a little bit mind-opening for everyone to see, okay, well, there are all these different options available. And there's someone saying, okay, they would go to speech slurred. And now we're getting more queries. So Samina, from your perspective, would you also go for a query here after seeing all the different interpretations of a term like this?
Yes, seeing how that the particular trouble speaking may be a sign and symptom of, let's say, a stroke, all the way to something psychological, or even, as someone mentioned, difficulty with the language. There are so many possibilities out there that I would definitely want to query in order to get additional context and perhaps capture the what's being reported accurately.
Yep, and we just got a very good comment here. Look at the narrative for context, and that is something that is a great point. And I did not mention, because if you are on the safety side of things, in clinical, you're very limited to what you can do. You have to stick to the term, a query must go out, you can't touch anything. But on the safety side, it's important to mention that they do have a little more flexibility in that they have source documents or narrative, and you can kind of maybe get some context around it and have the term updated. So, okay, here's someone that said they query, and if not, they would go to speech disorder. Connection with 3 SOCs to support signal detection better than an unevaluated event. Okay, so that's a good outlook on it, that they would go to speech disorder and simultaneously send a query. This way, for analysis, you get, because unevaluable event maybe kind of wouldn't really come up in your analysis. However, a term like this, you have to make that decision internally. Do you want this included in your analysis? Is it clear enough to include? Do you actually know what's going on? To put it to a speech disorder first and then have it connected for the analysis purposes. So that's actually a very great perspective that someone shared there. Different than, how I approached it. But again, that's why it's important to have internal coding convention and see how you would handle it.
And that's one of the reasons in MedDRA that we have, various disorder terms, quote unquote, because when you don't know more details or specificity what type of disorder, we have general various anatomical sites or organ-specific disorder terms for that purpose.
Yeah. Okay, so great. It looks like we got some secondary responses here, which is always great as well. So with that being said, we will get to our next example. So in this example, I actually gave 2 examples because I wanted to do one versus the other. And I thought this was something that in my past life actually came up quite a bit. I know this is more safety geared example, or examples, but we have here, the patient went 6 months without dose due to an interruption of therapy. And then we also have the patient went 6 months without dose. So these are 2 individual reported terms that could be received in a database. And now you're thinking, what do we do with these terms, right? Would we handle them the same? Should we code them the same? So those are the questions I have to you. So would you handle these the same? Does your organization have a convention for these types of terms? So again, in order to give everyone a chance for this to be very, very interactive today and have a chance for everyone on the line to share their thoughts and opinions with everyone else on the line, since we can't be in person and we have to kind of do it via polls at this point in time, It'd be much easier if we are in a room, you know, and we can all share together as we go through these. But again, so I will launch a series of polls to understand how this is being handled, you know, by different organizations, or how you yourself would handle this term as well, or these terms, I should say. So the first poll is: the patient went 6 months without dose due to an interruption of therapy, and the patient went 6 months without dose, would code to the same LLT. Do people believe this is true or false? How would you handle this term? So 100% right now are saying they would handle it differently. Oh, there we go. We got a couple people that would handle it the same, just a very few though. All right, we'll give another couple seconds, give people a chance to get into the polls. Okay, true is now creeping up just a bit. Ooh, it's up to 10% now. So we'll see. So majority right now, it looks like, would handle it, would not code these two terms to the same LLT. Okay, it looks like the poll's becoming stagnant, so we'll move on because I have another poll right now. So my organization has a coding convention to aid with the coding of similar terms. So is this true or false? Like, I'm not sure if a lot of companies, you know, would have this, but it might be a good idea to see. I just wanted to gauge where we're at with this and see if people do have conventions in place, because that's something, as someone newer to coding, or, you know, a smaller organization, it might be beneficial. You know, you get two terms like this, they're kind of similar, slightly different. You know, the wording is different, which could in turn create very different coding in the end. So with that being said, it's important to see if, you know, people have conventions in place for how they would handle it and what they would do. So it looks like majority does not, but some people do. So that's good feedback to take with you for future occurrences of this, and maybe how you would handle it. So with that, I have another poll. So how would you code the patient went 6 months without dose due to an interruption of therapy? So just this one term. Let's see how we would code it. Let's see what our options would be, what everyone thinks. And you can use your browser. You can go in, temporary interruption of therapy. Temporary interruption of therapy. Okay, very good. So it looks like therapy interruption. Okay. Therapy interrupted, temporary. And again, it's important to note that in this reported term, it does state the patient went 6 months without dose due to an interruption of therapy. So there is a time frame within the reported term. That's important to note, because as I see, a lot of people caught on to that and they're going with temporary interruption of therapy. So I'll give a couple more seconds to have everyone make sure we have a chance to give people a chance to get in that browser and then type in their response. Okay, it looks like. Okay, so we have interruption and temporary. So this is always the good thing. See, we could see in the last example and the poll, when we had open-ended, we have people from all over, and there was lots of different interpretations of the term. And in this instance, it looks like regardless, you know, everybody's kind of on the same page, which is a great thing. 6 months is a long time for a life-saving drug. Yes, that is correct. That is definitely true. And you don't want your patient going 6 months, right, without their drug. Okay, so it looks like here, lots of agreement. Wow, encapsulating, that's great. Therapy
Someone's very strongly feels about that term.
Yeah, query why interrupt it. Okay, could be a supply issue. That's a good valid point to be raised as well. You may internally decide, okay, if we get a term like this, we also, on the back end, after coding it, we would want to query why it was interrupted. Is it a supply issue? Is it an insurance issue? Is it the patient wasn't able to get their medication? So a very good point being raised. And this is why I like open-ended polls, to have you all chime in and help, you know, get different thoughts behind these terms. Drug dose omission and therapy interrupted. Okay, could also be due to an error. That is true. medication error. It's a good point. Okay, I'm going to give another second. See, because what I want to do next is I'm going to go to the next poll, which is now with all the responses that came in for the previous one, now how would you code the second verbatim in this instance? The patient went 6 months without dose. So how would you handle this term? Would you code it the same? Would you code it differently? Okay, we have drug administration interrupted, drug dose omission. Okay, therapy cessation, okay. Treatment non-adherence, we're getting lots of different options here. Query. Drug dose omission. Intentionally missed dose. Okay, that's an interesting one. In the actual reported term, I don't gather if I personally don't see if it was intentional or non-intentional. But we do have, we do know the patient went a total of 6 months. Even more vague concerning a cause, may not even need a treatment. Clarification, okay, again, we get the clarification, query for reason. Don't know what the dose frequency is supposed to be. Okay, that's a valid point as well. We don't know what the dose frequency is. Drug dose omission, treatment non-compliance, was it intentional? Okay, lots of different thoughts around this. Drug dose administration, interval too long, drug dose omission. So, Samina, I don't know if you have any thoughts around these types of terms or what you were thinking when you saw them. Well, we're waiting for responses to come in, but.
Well, I certainly would say that their intentionality is not there. And in one of my previous slides on medication error, when the intentionality is not there, and you don't know if it was accidental, you don't know the reason they missed the dose, that lends you to sort of sway towards a quote unquote issue. It's some type of issue because we don't know the intentionality. We don't know if it was accidental. So I would lean towards an issue type term.
Okay. It's intentional, patient could be, drug dose omission for unknown reason, query, drug dose omission for unknown reason, missed dose. Okay, I'm going to give a couple more seconds to get more.
Definitely sort of ties in with the way we both interpreted the picture in the beginning, right? There's different ways of looking at things, different areas where we focus on, but certainly, the approach of don't add any information or assume anything that's not there. At the same token, what you do pay attention to what is given there.
Yep. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go to my learning points. So as we saw, as Samina mentioned, as all of you greatly mentioned in the open-ended polls, this is, again, a topic where people may have different views on how to code. And again, when multiple views are present, I think I would always say, personally, it's best to provide guidance within your internal coding conventions, because you could see, again, the first example, pretty much there was more consensus on, a temporary interruption of therapy. But for the second example, there were a lot of valid points that were brought up that may need to be considered depending on how your organization wants to look at it or view it, or what kind of consistent approach they want to take. So this is very organization specific, I would say, and I would definitely say it's best to document an approach. So we went back and if we go back to previous poll where we asked if there was coding conventions in place, and some people did say for these types of terms, and I would say it's probably a good idea, especially for the more generic term that just says they went 6 months and it doesn't say, interruption of therapy, to have some sort of guidance around why, how your company will handle this, if you're going to query it or if you're going to code it. So in this case, I put here my final suggestions, temporary interruption of therapy for the first one, which, most people agreed with. And then the second one, I put missed dose. Or you could do drug dose omission, under the same PT, and the patient went 6 months without dose. As we saw, you may also need to query. Some companies want to know why. Why did they go without this dose? Some companies, say 6 months is too long. That's too great of a time frame. If they missed 1 or 2 doses, maybe that's okay for missed dose. But 6 months, we need to know why. What's going on? How did this happen? So it's like I said, it's very organization specific. There could be many reasons behind it. So it's great, you can either decide to code it. If you do, you can use a term like missed dose. If you don't have any other information, whether it was intentional or non-intentional, or you can decide maybe you just need to query right off the bat and get that additional information that is very important based off of all the points that all of you brought up during the poll. And again, I kind of did a dual example approach here just to show that there are two similar terms. Both went 6 months without a dose. One had a more specific reason and one had no additional information. So it's just to show that how things could be similar, but yet also in the end turn out very different and how you would handle it. So great job, everyone, in with your answers to the polls and with your suggestions. I do see the time, it's 12:15. Samina, we do have one more example. I'm not sure if you could probably get through it, I think, right?
Yeah. Do we have any questions before that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot to pause for questions. So.
I don't see any questions yet about this one.
Okay, great.
Okay, so let's go on to the example then.
Okay, we'll go through one more example.
Okay, so here I have composed an example for you, or a coding string. The physician diagnosed epilepsy in the child and prescribed tests to confirm for possible COVID-19 and possible otitis media due to his symptom of ear pain. So a lot of things going on here, so we sort of have to dissect and focus on different portions of this. I asked myself, is this clear enough to code? What actually happened? So let's look again. So there was a physician, he diagnosed epilepsy in a child, and in addition to the diagnosis, he prescribed tests to confirm, firstly, to prescribe tests to confirm for possible COVID-19 and tests for possible otitis media due to the symptom of ear pain. Okay, so this scenario I will need to look at and is very nicely summarized in our points to consider term selection guidelines or a document. It's going to help me approach the fact that the physician made a diagnosis, as well as there are two things that are possibilities that the patient may have, and it depends on the results of tests to confirm those potential provisional diagnoses. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Okay. So as I said, this particular, the principles that are sort of needing to be addressed or looked at deeper in this particular example are addressed in the MEDRA term selection points to consider document. So we have one definitive diagnosis when the physician said, okay, here's the diagnosis of epilepsy. But on the other two things, he wanted to order tests because he wasn't sure. So when you're not sure, as we can see in section 3.1 of our PTC document, a provisional diagnosis may be described as suspicion of, probable, presumed, likely, rule out, questionable. So the preferred option for a single or multiple provisional diagnoses is to select terms for the diagnosis. So in this case, he was saying possible COVID-19, so that's one type of provisional diagnosis. He also said possible otitis media, that's also another provisional diagnosis. So not only do you capture those, but you also capture any of the reported signs and symptoms associated with those provisional diagnoses. So here, very clearly, without a doubt, it's simplified the way we should approach this particular coding example with telling us how to approach those different types of nuanced things that are presented. One thing, the diagnosis, the actual confirmed diagnosis, as well as two things that he's giving a provisional diagnosis. So just for your reference, I'm going to go to the browser and show you how to access the various points to consider documents. Okay, so right here in your browser, there is a tab at the very top, MEDRA documentation. I click on that. This takes me to our medra.org website. And what we have done for users here very conveniently is a separate tab where we house all of our points to consider documents. And let me open that up and show you that the document that I'm going to reference, the Medra Term Selection Points to Consider document, that I have a screenshot that I showed you for section 3.1. I'm going to open this up. And when you scroll down to the relevant section for our coding example 3.1, deals with provisional, there it is. This deals with the provisional diagnosis without signs and symptoms. Now, when you have your additional time later on after the session, you can go down and drill down, and there's a very nice chart here that tells you how to approach definitive diagnoses when they're single, as well as multiple diagnoses, how you deal with them, as well as how you deal with multiple provisional diagnoses, as in our case. Okay, so just for your reference and just to let you know how to access these documents, let's go back to the poll and ask you how you would approach this. So let's go back to the slides and minimize that, and then go to our poll question on what you think would be the best LLTs in order to capture all the things that are reported in this particular example. Okay, so everyone went straight to the diagnosis, which the doctor said he diagnosed the child with epilepsy, so super. Then we had a couple of provisional diagnoses. We had a couple of symptoms, well, not a couple, but one symptom. How do you approach that? Okay, so some people are capturing the ear pain, symptom of ear pain. Others are also capturing the other second provisional diagnosis of otitis media. And then people are handling the COVID-19 a little differently. Some people are choosing just the plain COVID-19. Others are choosing, or the majority, are 23% are choosing suspected COVID-19 without laboratory confirmation. Okay, so a few more seconds for people to ponder and perhaps change their mind if they feel like it. Okay, so let's go into the browser just for a little second, and I want to see how people chose both COVID-19 options. I'm going to go to my browser and type in COVID-19 because that was one of my, let me see my browser, there it is. COVID-19, because that was one of my provisional diagnoses. Let me see what's in the browser, in the Medra terminology regarding COVID-19. So there's an exact match LLT of COVID-19. I'm going to open that up. There's a PT COVID-19. I'm going to open that up. So the way to open up a PT and see all associated LLTs under it is to highlight the term, right click, and in the my mouse is not too great. I'm going to choose go to browser. Okay. And here I'm going to highlight COVID-19. There you go. And then my mouse is not cooperating. I want to open up COVID-19 PT so I can see all the, can you open COVID-19 PT? Thank you, Nicole. My mouse is not cooperating. Okay, so under COVID-19, which was our provisional diagnosis, I see a variety of LLTs. And then I see lots of LLTs that have to do with, one says laboratory confirmed COVID-19, right? But our COVID-19 is not laboratory confirmed. In fact, it's a provisional diagnosis, and the physician is ordering a test in order to, confirm whether he has it or not. So he's still suspicious about it. So for those of you who chose COVID-19, that is incorrect. A better choice would be, let me see. Okay, so now a better choice would be COVID-19 pneumonia. Here's something that I want to look at further, suspected COVID-19, because actually that's what it is, right? The doctor is suspecting, that's why it's a provisional diagnosis, and he's ordering a test. So the best LLT with the given report that we have is LLT suspected COVID-19 without laboratory confirmation, right? At this point, it has not been confirmed. In fact, the doctor ordered a test in order to confirm. So for those of you who chose that LLT, kudos to you. That is absolutely the correct LLT, or the most accurate LLT. Okay, so let's go back to our slide. I think the take-home message has been done. Are we back on the slides? Let me see. Okay, super. All right, so here for you in the final suggestions, what I did is I highlighted in yellow those concepts that we need to capture. First of all, based on the points to consider term selection document, we do capture the diagnosis, which is epilepsy. We also capture provisional diagnoses and multiple provisional diagnoses in this case, the possible COVID-19, the possible otitis media, and the sign and symptom, if any, are reported with those provisional diagnoses. So I did ear pain, which is a sign and symptom. So those of you who chose that are correct. And then, of course, the best LLT was LLT suspected COVID-19 without lab confirmation. So these are the best LLT choices in order to address this particular coding exercise. So those are the final suggestions. Do we have any questions around this, Hannah?
Yes, we received one for the previous example, but we'll start with this example. Someone asked, why didn't we choose a congenital epilepsy?
Because it's not reported as such. We take it exactly the way it's reported. He diagnosed epilepsy in the child, and actually we don't know if it's congenital, whether he was born with it or whether it was evident later on. So with the limited amount of information we had, we did the exact match, epilepsy. But that is a valid question to ponder or think about.
Wonderful. And someone right before you said suspected COVID-19 submitted that, so well done. And then someone asked if you could demonstrate how you get the information in the term box in the browser.
Okay, so let's go to the browser. The information about getting the points to consider document?
I think they maybe mean the term details.
Okay. So let's say I have some question about the particular PT COVID-19. So I highlight the term with my mouse, I right click, and then there's this whole options, right? So I went for this particular exercise, I went to go to browser. So what that does is then I highlight the term name under the primary SOC, which has a blue. The primary SOC is always highlighted with a blue box around it. So I highlight that term. And then what happens is on the left-hand side, that particular term opens up. And I can see the hierarchy of it, where it resides, which HLGT, which SOC, which HLT. And at this moment, I'm curious to see of all the various LLTs under this particular PT. So I open click on the plus sign, and it opens up and shows me all the LLTs housed under that particular PT, and I can choose the best one that I think. So in our scenario, we didn't find the most accurate one under PT COVID-19. Instead, we found it in another PT suspected COVID-19. Now, just since they brought that up, you can highlight the term, right click, and you can also click on open history. This is one other functionality, and see when that particular term was added in MedDraw. That gives you a history of the term. It was added in MedDraw relatively recently in version 23.0. Okay, so I hope that has addressed the question.
Yes, they confirmed that that was what they were looking for. And then
Great.
We've had two people write in about the LLT, now a third one, LLT otitis media, possible otitis media, about why that's not been selected.
Possible otitis media. So let's go back to the browser and search otitis. So possible otitis media is a provisional diagnosis, right? And we address provisional diagnoses based on the points to consider term selection document. We code that particular thing. Otitis, if I can spell otitis media. Okay, so I want to look for the term otitis media. This is basically just a direct match. Otitis media, otitis media. So We did code that and captured that because it's mentioned as a provisional diagnosis, as well as the sign and symptom of that, which was ear pain. We captured both based on the direction or the approach recommended in the PTC document. Okay. And now I think this is the time in the session where we take feedback from everyone about what they would like to see in upcoming sessions, any challenging verbatim strings, any challenging concepts they want addressed in our upcoming Let's Code Together sessions,
Yeah. So
or any feedback they have.
Yeah.
Yep.
Feedback for sure, future examples. And while we're doing that, Hannah, were there any additional questions, or that was it?
I think Samina answered the otitis media question that we got, and then we had one for the previous example, and that was the only one we haven't gotten to, that just says the hierarchy is very different for therapy interruption and missed dose.
Yes. Yes, that's correct. The very different, and that's why it was important to point out the two different terms that are similar in nature, yet very different coding wise.
And for this comment here, is there an even simpler basic session? Not in this Let's Code Together, but I would recommend taking our other session on Medra coding basics. That would be possibly a good one to listen to and attend.
Yes. And even, if you're very new, you can even take a what is Medra and how is it used, but that's more like a high level overview. I would definitely suggest Medra coding basics, and then we have an advanced Medra coding as well. So for trouble speaking, what we suggested in the end was query would be great to handle how to handle that term, since we're unclear of what it could possibly be. And then so once a query is set, we can, if you need to code in the interim, you could code to something generic like unevaluable event, or people had there was another suggestion to get a speech disorder if your company says, if they want to go in that direction for analysis purposes. So, okay, this is great. We're also getting some feedback that people like the session, so that's always nice to hear. All right, and we'll definitely, if there's more examples, I'm going to leave this poll open. Yeah, and that's the whole point. I'm very happy to see this comment, the things to consider, because sometimes, coding could seem very simple or very straightforward, but it's always great to hear how different people handle it. And I really like to get everyone's point of view on the phone, because I'm also, sometimes siloed in my own mind and my own thoughts. And that's why I kind of walked you through my way of how I would handle the terms such as trouble speaking. But it's great to see how different people handle it as well, so that you could take that and kind of use it as a thinking point when you receive these kind of complicated terms. The same way Samina walked us through how to do many different examples and kind of thinking points to keep in mind for when you're actually doing live coding. Because we all know how challenging it can be practically every day. Or there's always something that comes up, or something people don't agree with, or something, where there's 10 different opinions on it. So.
Okay, so I would like to comment on several comments that have been coming in on off-label use and med error type things. So as I said before, we have sessions wholly and solely dedicated for medication errors. There's one coming up, the Medication Error General Principles session on November 22nd. There's also, it's a partner session, Medication Error Workshop Part 2 on November 29th. So if you're interested on off-label use and issues and concepts around medication errors, I would highly recommend to attend those two sessions.
Yeah. And with that being said, we're going to keep this poll open. I do have a thank you slide I can just flash on the screen. We do have some websites for everyone that could take you to get more information. We went through a lot of these today. Training schedule, if you want more training. I know people asked about that. You could go to medra.org. And then we have a quick thank you, and I'll keep the poll open while we do this. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone on the line for taking time out of your busy days from all over the world today. This was fantastic to come and sit with Samina and I for an hour and a half and go through some coding examples. And if there's anything we could do to make this more interactive, or, we'll use these examples that were given to us today for future sessions. And if there's anything else you would like to see or hear or us to walk through, please let us know. We'll be happy to accommodate what we can. And I just want to say again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, and just think it's already Thursday. We're almost on the weekend. And Samina, I don't know if you want to just say some last parting words before we close the session.
Definitely. I would like to say we are very highly encouraged, greatly encouraged by all the positive feedback. Keep that coming in. Let us know what other things you'd like to see in upcoming Let's Code Together sessions. And again, we appreciate both of us, Hannah, Nicole, and myself. I really appreciate your interactivity. It makes it very enriching for us as well. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Bye-bye.